As announced, we'll end at 11:45 so that those who have, children to attend to can, and those of you who have questions, we can stay here, and I'll be here for a little while to answer any questions you may have. Okay, so let's move away from this terrible mistake in my life. And so the last time we were together, I basically addressed the question as to why the Israelites were so predisposed to follow, the gods of the Canaanites, the Mesopotamians, rather than to follow God. And the basic answer to that has something to do with the fact that men and women have been throughout history. We have been empirical theologians. And by that I mean that historically we've had a tendency to derive our understanding of who the gods are, right? We're talking about, polytheistic people. Our understanding of who the gods are through or by our experience. So if our experience is positive, then we have a positive view of the gods. If our experience is negative, then we will have a negative view of the gods. And we're still like that today. If you are experiencing a series of misfortunes, say you have a flat tire, and then you have an accident, and then you get a broken leg, and then it doesn't heal properly. Let me tell you something. After a while, you're going to start asking yourself, why is God so upset with me? And you're going to start thinking, well, maybe God isn't so good after all. And this is why it is so important when it comes to fundamental issues. It is so important to go back to special revelation, that is Scripture. Because it is only through special revelation that we can, one, believe that God is good and all-powerful. And it is only through special revelation that we can continue to live our lives with these two convictions. And there are people in this church that I've talked to. I won't name them because I don't have their permission. But there are people in this church. One person, he's over 90. And that's his conviction. God is good and all-powerful despite all the obstacles that he has experienced. And that is which gives him hope. All right, so, and of course, the reason why it was so important for the Israelites, the ancient Israelites, to assimilate these truths from special revelation, particularly the creation account, the Torah, and all that, is because we are as human beings, we're liable to be influenced through what I call ideological colonialism, right? We like to go along to get along. And that was the great danger that the ancient Israelites faced as when they would come into the promised land. They would live among people who had a natural understanding of the faith of the gods. And because it was so natural to human nature to have those beliefs, and I'll give you a bit of an example of that a little later, the danger was that they would simply go along, assimilate these beliefs, and stop being the people of God. And that was extremely important. You're going to understand there's a reason why God is so adamant to discipline his people throughout their history. And you know why? Because the people of Israel were to be the conduit, the pipeline through which the Son of God would come and save all of humanity. There was more to it than simply saving the people of God, saving the Israelites. It was all about, it was absolutely essential that the Israelites survive as God's people, because without them, the Son of God could not come as a human being and save humanity. There was a much, much bigger plan there that was necessary, for which it was necessary for the Israelites to be preserved as God's people. All right. Now, I realize some of you are experts in the Old Testament. You know forward and backwards, and you know everything about the Torah and the Pentateuch. But some of you may not. And so I want to do just a little bit, a short survey, a high view, 30,000 feet from Artemis 2, when they were in orbit around the moon there. So we'll do that. Oops, I went too far. So the first book of the Torah is the book of Genesis. In Hebrew, these books are named after the first words of each book. So in Hebrew, it's Bereshit, right, in the beginning. And what you find in the book of Genesis, wonderful book, greatest book, everybody says it. That's my imitation of Donald Trump. Everybody says it's the most wonderful book. Anyways, so you've got the creation account, wonderful account, everybody says it. And it's chapters 1 to 3. This is where you get worldview, the great worldview text to instruct us on who we are, who God is, and how we relate to the world. Then we move to chapters 4 to 11, and the big issue in chapters 4 to 11 is who's going to win? Human sin or God? And a lot of bad stuff goes on to the point where you think, man, we're not going to make it. Human sin is greater than God's grace. But we get to the end of chapter 11, and sure enough, we discover that divine grace is greater, infinitely greater than human sin. You can try all you want. Sin will never conquer the grace of God. And then we have the stories of the patriarchs in chapters 12 to 50. And those are wonderful stories. If we only had the time, we could spend it. They are designed to make people talk, to make people think. There are ethical stories, and the author is very careful not to give his opinion on whether a particular character did something right or wrong. They are designed for the people who read them to discuss some of the most profound issues that we face as human beings. Some of it has to do with family, ethical choices, and so forth. They're really designed for people to debate. And then we get to the book of Exodus. These are the words. And the book of Exodus is really about the great liberation. First from slavery, and this is wonderful because without the book of Exodus is really the first step, should I say, to the abolition, at least to transferring slavery, this institution of slavery, from being good, considered good, because it was totally normal to have slaves throughout human history. And here we have a story that that proclaims that slavery is evil. Right? So it's the first domino in that long list, that long series of dominoes that would eventually fall, that would lead a good part of the world to say slavery is evil. Okay, so that's the first part. And I put a horse there, the strong horse. You're going to understand the whole incident, the encounter between Moses and God, Moses and Pharaoh, Moses who represents God and Pharaoh who represents the gods of Egypt, all of that has one purpose, to demonstrate that Yahweh, the God that now Moses introduces, is the strong horse, that you can trust him. Because you're going to understand, Moses is asking the Israelites to move from Egypt into the black hole. They knew what they had in Egypt, right? They knew the devil they had. But they didn't know what was beyond, the Red Sea and what would happen to them. So they really had, and you know what? We do that all the time, right? We always looking, like when we have a major decision to make, we're trying to see, okay, so what is, where's my advantage? Where is my winning card in this thing? And when I moved from Quebec City at the age of 16 and I moved to Manitoba, that's a decision I had to make. I had to say, okay, do I have a better future in Manitoba, or do I have a better future if I stay in Quebec? What God had engineered my life circumstances that I really had no choice. There was nothing in Quebec. I figured, I don't know what's in Manitoba. but it's got to be better. I got to have a better future in Manitoba than I did in Quebec, and in fact, it worked out. So the 10 plagues of Egypt were really designed to demonstrate, and that's why you have to go to the bitter end. People ask, well, how come God doesn't quit after the 5th plague? It's because he hasn't yet demonstrated his full authority and power over Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt after the 5th plague. You got to go all the way to the 10th, and then we're pretty good. The Israelites say, yeah, okay, this guy's serious. We can trust him. Okay? So very important. Number 3, Leviticus. That's the boring book. You know, when you're reading through the Bible, you get into Leviticus. If you have a problem sleeping at night. I talked to a guy this morning, he said, I don't sleep very well. I said, just buy one of my books. I'll give him one. He'll thank me. Well, Leviticus is a little bit like that. If you really don't understand what's going on, it's going to be a bit of a boring book. And essentially what that book does is, number 1, it teaches us, the readers, the price of sin, right? The price of forgiveness. What does it take to gain forgiveness? It takes life, and that's why that book is full of animal sacrifices, right? And then number 2, it teaches us how to live right, which is, in effect, the purpose of the entire Torah. I could say more about that, but we'll move on. Ah, yeah, Dutch Blitz. Well, I hate that game. I don't mean to offend anybody, but my wife, my daughter, my sister-in-law, my mother-in-law, they were big fans of Dutch Blitz. And I, like a naive lamb to be led to the sacrifice, I would play Dutch Blitz and realize that I was genetically inept, handicapped, to ever win at that game. Because in my view, you had to kind of very judiciously and meticulously decide, make choices in terms of where your cards are. But by the time I've decided where I should put my first card, somebody was screaming, Blitz. So when we moved from Quebec to California, we mysteriously lost all the Dutch Blitz games. And I told my wife these were illegal in the United States. Anyways, I think we got a few more of those somehow. But in any case, why am I talking about Dutch Blitz? Because when we look at the book of Numbers, people say, well, this is the generation that, were too faithless. They didn't believe in God to be allowed to go into the promised land. Fair enough. So God said, you're going to go in circles for 40 years. And what do you do when you have nothing to do but go in circles? Well, you play games, and they played Dutch Blitz. We know that. Archaeologists have discovered these games. Well, it's not quite that simple. The 40-year period in Egypt, in the desert, wasn't simply designed for them to just wait to die, which was one reason, so the next generation could go in. It was also an opportunity for God to train the people of Israel for when they would go into the promised land as an armed force. All right, as an army. And so for 40 years, and I challenge you, read the book of Numbers again, and you're going to find it's a boot camp. All right? The whole thing is designed to be a boot camp. They're told when to get it, when to move, when to stay. They are taught how to follow orders from God. So that when the older generation finally dies, the younger generation is prepared to, or better equipped, should I say, to go into the promised land and face the challenges they're going to have to face there. And then finally, this is a very moving book, the book of Deuteronomy. In Greek here, second law or reiteration of the law, but essentially it's Moses' farewell speech. As you know, he loses his temper at some point. God says, I'm sorry, you're not going to go in. And okay, so Moses gives a long speech in which he reminds them of their history with God, and he exhorts them to be faithful to God in the future. All right. Okay, so that's my Artemis II perspective on the Torah. 3 principles I want you to keep in mind that are taught over and over and over again in the Torah. The first one is God works in history. That seems so simple. God, of course God works in history, but it is one of the most difficult principles to actually accept in terms of its implications. And basically what it says here is God limits himself to our human condition in order to communicate with us, in order to make himself known. And here, if I may allow myself a personal example to illustrate this great principle, it's the best example that has ever been given. Everybody says it. And when we were much younger, I would come back home from work, and for whatever reason, the kids always knew it. You know, even when they were like 5, 3, and 1, 3, 5, or 6, or whatever. There's 2 years between. And, they would always know when I was coming home. And so it didn't matter where they were. And I knew exactly what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to go into the living room and lie on the floor. And then they would come running and basically jump on me, and they would expect me to make all kinds of animal noises and attack them. And that would last for about 10 minutes or so, right? And then we were good, and they don't do that anymore, just so you're wondering. But anyway, so they were good after 10 minutes, but that was the ritual, right? And the reason why it was important for me to do that is they were little kids. So if I was going to identify with them, communicate with them, I had to go down to their level. I couldn't just bring them up to mine and say, okay, so today we're going to study the Hebrew alphabet, and then we're going to do the Greek alphabet. We'll have a little test. You know, if I had tried that, they wouldn't be talking to me anymore, right? So you got to adapt yourself. You have children, grandchildren, you have to adapt yourself to them in order to relate to them. That's what it means to limit, like to go into the historical context. That's what it meant for God, to limit himself, to adapt himself to our historical situation. That little principle here explains just about everything bizarre that goes on in the Old Testament, right? It's God adapting himself to our historical situation. The second one, which is almost as serious and baffling, is God working in partnership with men and women. That's his basic governing principle. God works in partnership with men and women. And even at my age, and it's been decades since I've developed this whole concept, I still find it baffling. Because if it was me, I wouldn't work with men and women. I would work with robots. Androids, the exterminator, you know what I mean? Like, that's fun to work with robots. They'll do exactly what you want them to do. No excuse, as long as they have that nuclear power cell in them and a second one to make up if the first one fails. They will do what you want them to do. Human beings, on the other hand, are a big pain in the you-know-where, all right? But God is committed to that. From the moment in eternity past where he says, I'm going to create a people that are going to be like me in some fashion, in my image. Right away, he knew what the obstacles would be. He knew what the weaknesses of that approach would be. And yet, God decided to work in partnership with men and women before the fall, and that's the principle he maintained after the fall. And there's some advantages, disadvantages, but in the end, God has decided that the benefits outweighed the costs of doing so. So God works in partnership. The third one is personal responsibility and accountability. A Jewish lady who took, I think I may have told you that story the last time, but I'm old, so I can repeat myself. So a Jewish lady who was taking my course on the prophet, at the end of one class, she says, Pierre, do you know what the basic principle, the most fundamental principle of the Torah is? I didn't want to look stupid, so I said, well, why don't you tell me what the... She says personal responsibility. And that is one explanation behind the fact that though the Jewish people has been the most persecuted people throughout human history, they just keep bouncing back. That's because the minute a Jewish girl or boy is born, they put the words of the Torah right in their mouth, metaphorically, and they memorize that. That's one principle, that personal accountability, personal responsibility, a great, great principle. And we see that illustrated all throughout the book of Genesis. Cain and Abel, I'll have a little session about that. And you know what? Basically, the implications of all these principles are very clear. If you are coming to church on a Sunday morning through a back lane and you hear a little kid, a 2-year-old kid fall in the pool somewhere, here's what you got to do. You pray very, very quickly, and then you jump in the pool. You do both. Right? You don't ask yourself, is this a time where I should just pray? Is this a time where I should just act? You pray and act. That's what these principles imply. Okay, so it implies action when we see issues that need to be resolved. All right, so today, we'll see how far we get. I want to do a short introduction to the creation account. Now, the creation account, trust me on this one, is hands down the most important text in the Old Testament. And I would say it's the most revolutionary text ever to appear in ancient history. But here, I don't want to give you just an introduction. I want to do what the author do, if I get to it, and if not, we'll do it next week. The author has an agenda. The author sees a problem with these Israelites. He sees a problem with these Israelites. They're really Egyptians in their way of thinking, Mesopotamians in their way of thinking. So he uses that text to change the way they think because there is an issue. And what I'm going to do this morning, a little bit later, God willing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, no, here is an issue that we're facing in our society. And I'm going to show you how the creation account could be used to address these fundamental issues, that fundamental problem that we are facing as a culture. The creation account is the greatest. And I say that without reservation. I could debate that with anybody, anytime, anywhere. The creation account is the greatest, most extraordinary, most revolutionary, most unique text ever to emerge in ancient history. And apart from the New Testament, there is nothing, absolutely nothing that comes even close to it. Now, the creation account is not just a cute little text, like you look at something cute, little bird, it's cute, right? No, that's not that. It's a polemic text. It's a polemic text. It is a text designed to fight something, to be an alternative to something else. And to make a long story short, it is a text designed to be a source of life, words of life, to confront a culture that is worshiping death. And I hope that by now you're beginning to see where I'm going with this, because we are slowly sinking into a culture of death, unfortunately. So we're going to need some words of life to rejuvenate that culture. Now, here's the problem. It was easy to take the Hebrews out of Egypt, no problem at all, a few special effects, and we're done. It turned out that it was a lot more difficult to take Egypt out of the Hebrews, if you see what I mean. All right? Because naturally, we don't orbit, we don't tend to go to the God of truth, to the God of love. We tend naturally, because of our nature, we tend to go away from the God of truth and the God of love to idols. It's been the human problem since the very creation of humanity until now. And so the creation account is designed to provide the building blocks of a new worldview, a worldview that would teach the Israelites the truth, that would open a real window on who God is, on who they are as human beings, and on their relationship with God themselves and all of creation. And if they were, and here's the kick, if they were to adopt for themselves these elements, these pieces of the new worldview, integrate them into their lives, they would live. That was the promise. But if they were to reject them, they would die. And that is the message of the prophets. I'll say a few words about the prophets in a minute. That's the message of the prophets. Adopt this, and you will live. But boy, if you turn to that, you are going to die. So, what was the purpose of the creation account in a few words? First of all, to provide, to serve as an alternative to the Canaanite worldview. Okay? Because without that, if they go into the promised land and become good Canaanites, everybody's done for. Not just the Israelites, but all of humanity. Then all of God's plan for redemption crumbles, it falls apart. So it's very important that the Israelites would reject the Canaanite worldview, which was so natural because it goes along human nature, and adopt the worldview that God was giving them, the divine worldview. Number two, and this is where it comes in terms of relevance for today, it's designed to act as an acid on structures of exploitation and dehumanization. So when you look at slavery, for example, which was a completely natural, accepted institution throughout all of human history, the minute the biblical text, the creation account, is adopted into a culture, and if that culture in fact has slavery as one of its fundamental institutions, what the biblical text will begin to do is dissolve it. It works as sulfuric acid. You say, how does Gilbert know about sulfuric acid? It's because one of my pipes once was plugged up, and the plumber, not Bruce, Bruce told me, you don't want to fool around with sulfuric acid. But the plumber told me, he says, go and buy a bottle of sulfuric acid. But he says, when you do so, quickly put some cold water into it. Anyways, we got it done. But the biblical text works as sulfuric acid on structures, institutions of exploitation and dehumanization. It also offers a vision, a revolutionary vision of the world, one that our young people particularly need so desperately. And I'll say more about that. And fourthly, it provides the theological DNA of the entire Old Testament and the New Testament. Everything you find in the entire Old Testament and the New Testament, in its theological DNA is completely dependent and contingent on Genesis 1, 2, 3. Now, I'm going to end with this today, because I want to give you a little bit of an insight into what the biblical account, what Moses was up against in terms of the worldview that the ancient Israelites were facing. Now look, in ancient Mesopotamia, what have you got? Creation originates in violence. Violence is believed to be at the source of human institutions. In the Genesis account, no hint, no clue, no reference at all to any conflict or war. Peace and the world is the result of the benevolent action of God. In ancient Mesopotamia, the universe is filled with deities, gods, high ones, low ones, the Igigi, the Anunnaku, the Igigi, and so forth. In Genesis, no gods. They're all gone, except for one. That changes everything. It changes everything. For example, in Mesopotamia, the influence of the gods, they were evil, those gods, would be mediated through the environment, right, which gave rise to belief in magic and manipulation of magical powers. In Genesis, magic is impossible because you got rid of all the gods, right? And that's why when missionaries go to traditional settings, traditional tribes, one of the first things to fall is the belief in magical powers and rituals. It changes the world. The gods operate within a highly organized hierarchy. You got your upper gods, your lower gods. In Genesis, there's only one God. I could talk about the implication of that. In Mesopotamia, human experience is characterized by conflict with the gods. You're always at war with the gods. You're always trying to buy them, to corrupt them, right? In Genesis, human experience is defined as a partnership with God. You know, this notion of partnership did not exist in the ancient world. Human beings were slaves. That's it, that's all. They only had value to the extent that they could feed the gods. They had the value of my dishwasher. That's it. As long as my dishwasher does what it's supposed to do, I like it. Good dishwasher. The minute it starts leaking and doing, keeping the dishes dirty and all that, bad dishwasher. And if it doesn't, get better, I just throw it out and get another one. This is the way the gods look at human beings. Not God. We're in partnership with him. In Mesopotamia, human experience is characterized by fear and uncertainty. Human beings were orphans in the universe. In the Genesis account, human experience is ultimately defined by knowledge and confidence in God. I think you get the idea. Okay, here's the thesis. Just in case I die this week, I'm going over time. Just in case I die, it could happen. I'm an old guy, right? So here's the thesis that I'm going to develop next week, maybe the week after as well. The Western world appears to be collapsing. Now, when I said that a couple of years ago, nobody took me seriously. Now I've given about 6 lectures in the last 6 months on this very issue. The Western world appears to be collapsing, right? There's all kinds of symptoms that indicate that, and I'm not the first one to see it. Look at these guys, Victor Davis Hanson, Douglas Murray, Sadgad, Thomas Sowell. What a wonderful intellectual, one of the greatest in the world. And now here's the thing. Why is this happening? Because we're witnessing an erosion of the Judeo-Christian worldview. Everything that we know, everything we appreciate in our culture is the result of the injection of the Judeo-Christian worldview into our culture. Third, what's the church's responsibility? Do we ignore it? Do we go along with it? Are we going to be co-opted with it because it's easier to go along to get along? Or are we going to address it somehow? And if we're going to do it, on what basis are we going to do this? And then fourthly, and I'll leave you with that, I'm saying increasingly, and I'm saying that to everyone who wants to hear me, I think that we are on the verge of a great revival. Our young people are sick and tired of these lies that they've been fed, force-fed, I would say, for the last 4 or 5 decades. And they want something else. And I think one of these days they're going to be, because you see, they're made in the image of God, right? That's structural. You can't erase that. There's nothing you can do to undo the image of God in our soul. Nothing you can do. You can't take it out. You can't erase it. Even sulfuric acid is not going to do it. So one of these days, they're going to say, oh man, this is all crap. There is something in me that wants something greater. And if the church is ready to offer, to point these young people in the direction of the God in whose image they're made, we're going to see some wonderful things happen. Maybe not in the way we expect, but it will happen. And on this, I'm going to end with a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for these wonderful men and women who have given their lives to you, who have been touched by you. And Lord, I pray that in this great time of cultural inflection, that we as your church, as your people, may have the wisdom and the courage to point particularly young men and women, to you, so that they may also discover the peace that you give, the redemption that you offer. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you very much. I kept you a little longer.